Hey guys, subscribe for daily content, and if you're shopping for gear, make sure you check out the description for the newest items at some of the very best online retailers. There's also links for some of the items that I personally recommend. Thanks!
What's going on YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a really special knife review slash knife overview to show with you guys. This is the Crescent Edges Eternal, which is, a lot of you are now familiar with Crescent Edges, likely because of the spade. That I feel like was the model that they released that really like drew people in. And truthfully, if they had not released the spade and that this was their only release, I think it would have had essentially the same effect. I mean, he released not one, but two. Actually, I think there's even another model or two, but just some absolutely wild and super unique knives all at once. And that's really saying something, because 2025 in the knife industry, we've got, the benefit of having choice, and you can get, you can get absolutely incredible knives for sub $50. We have so many choices, The downside is that our market, our industry is massively oversaturated with very boring stuff. So while there are obvious downsides, if you're going to EDC this, which we'll talk about, this is a breath of fresh air. Like as a full-time knife reviewer, this is the type of stuff that I live for. This is the type of stuff that I go, oh my gosh, I'm so happy that there are people out there willing to take design risks to bring something cool to the table. Very, very awesome. These knives are built by Riot, and it's very clear. These are incredibly well-made knives, which is really cool. Thanks so much to Crescent Edges for sending this in for me to take a look at. Thanks to my patrons for supporting me. I want to point this out real quick. This knife was built for me before he did the drop, because I had reached out to him and because I saw the renderings and I was like, dude, are these for real? He's like, yeah, they're just renderings right now, but we're going to do these. The idea is we're going to do these in the future. Big risk, but I really want to bring these to life. And I was like, well, let me know, man, because I would love to showcase these. Like if these are actually going to be done, sorry, still getting over my cold. I said, if these are really going to be done, then, let me know. So he said, well, let me know what spec you want and I'll build you one. And so I don't think the combination of the DLC blade, which this is a satin DLC, and the stonewashed or blasted titanium, I don't think that was an option. I think you either could get satin with the blasted or stonewashed, or you could get DLC with DLC. So this one here says, I think it says Metal Complex spec. Yeah, which is cool. That's neat. I don't think this exact configuration was available. I am almost certain that he would do this in the future, right? So these were dropped, and to my knowledge, they are sold out. But his first run with this and the spade were unbelievably successful. So I would expect to see more of this in the future. Make sure that you follow Crescent Edges. And if there's a way to sign up for email notifications on his website, then I would definitely do that. But follow Crescent Edges on Instagram as well. Let's go ahead and get a measurement here. Overall length of the Eternal is coming in at 8 inches. Your blade length, we're going to go, I think the edge is actually longer than where we normally measure with the blade. It's about 3.55 inches. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons. Any custom scales you find in this section can be found down in the description under Original Goat and Others. So it's a full-size knife. It's just not nearly as robust as something like the 8010. Let's put it up against the Spyderco PM2 and the Spyderco Para 3. This is, again, about the same size as the PM2 with more cutting edge. And then finally, let's put it up against the Benchmade Griptilianer, in this case, the Ritter Hogue and the Hogue Deca. How's the action? Oftentimes, when you're making a design like this that's very aesthetic, like it's built around a specific aesthetic, excuse me, it can be tricky to make it function the way that the snobbiest of knife enthusiasts expect. And I'm going to raise my hand. Big knife snob, I want everything to be perfect, and I often don't budge on that. If I'm like, it looks cool, but it doesn't function how I want. I'm usually going to call it out. But I really got to hand it to Crescent Edges here, because the way that they did this is awesome. It's not going to be to everybody's liking, but it is really cool. First of all, access to the lock bar, it looks like it's going to be bitey and pinchy, but it's not. When I'm sitting in front of the TV watching YouTube knife reviews, flipping my knife over and over again, I don't want my finger to be ouchy. You can do this all day, no problem. The D10 is also beautifully well tuned. Ooh, By the way, is that edge sharp? No. It's a false wedge. That's why I'm touching it. You can see the cutting bevel here, false wedge here. So there's nothing there. It's just meant to complete that symmetrical aesthetic. Why didn't they do a double edge? We'll get back to that. Initially, I would have loved to see that, and still part of me wants to see it, but I can understand why they didn't. You'll notice that this side of the flipper tab is extended versus this side. We have a female end of the pivot cap here that's dead centered. But on this side, we have an adjustment head that's off-centered, and that's likely how they did that. It's like I said in the Crescent review, they've got the barrel underneath the cap is off-centered so that you can complete this, symmetrical aesthetic, but still get the functionality of the pivot that's off-centered, which is done that way to get the proper amount of leverage for the blade off the flip. Now, it's not impossible to center the pivot. I'll point out like the Sharp by Design Arch Nemesis. From my understanding, that was really tricky to do. You have to get to a point where the blade is heavy enough. He did accomplish it on the smaller one as well, but to my understanding, that's really, really hard to do. So I'm not going to count it off for them having the off-center pivot and having the blade sit favoring this side, allowing part of the edge to stick out, which is part of the reason why they didn't. Well, that's the whole reason why they didn't sharpen on both sides to complete this. But the reason that this is sticking out further is because this pivot sitting in between these two, right? When you flip it, now they're perfectly even, which is cool. They've managed to achieve exceptionally good flipping action. It's a great detent, and at the same time, they also have that aesthetic in the open position where everything is nice and, it's like a big T. It looks like a sword, a World of Warcraft sword. Such a cool aesthetic, right? I love it, especially in here. This is so cool. We'll get back to it. Getting hung up here. But the action is very, very good. And the flipper tab actually, despite just being like kind of a rectangle, it's jimped in the right spots and it's knocked down. So you can push button this or you can light switch it. Super satisfying. Really cool. Whether you're deploying it to use it real quick and put it back in your pocket, sorry, or you are, sitting and flipping it over and over again, watching YouTube. It's going to put a smile on your face. It's just really, really good. So I applaud them for being able to achieve this aesthetic and very satisfying and functional action. It's just really, really nice. And on top of that, no double clutch. He put the detent ball in the right spot. So that tab comes down, contacts your finger. Just exactly what you want. Very, very cool. So let's do, did we do the carry profile thickness up against the Spyderco Para 3? This is actually a contoured material. You can see like the curvature of the titanium, but the inlay in the center is flat. So it's kind of confusing. Like holding it, you would assume this is all like flat, like cut flat, but they're using the more expensive machines. It's just that the primary, like the centerpiece is flat. So it kind of, it throws off your senses, I guess is what I'm saying. So it is about the same thickness as the Spyderco Para 3. Length and height up against the PM2 and the Para 3. Where's the PM2? It's really not that bad. I mean, if you carry other things, if you've got other things in your pocket, that flipper tab is going to act as like a junk hook, kind of. Like it might pull a bunch of stuff up out of your pocket. Like if you keep your car keys and your knife in your pocket, this might attach to it and pull it up by one of the key rings. I don't carry anything else in my knife pocket except my knife, so it wasn't really a problem to me. And as far as like height goes, it's not quite as tall as the Para 3, but yeah, I mean, if you're used to carrying knives of this height or size, it's going to be fairly similar outside of that big jutting flipper tab there. So let's go ahead and weigh it. What are we looking at for materials? This is MagnaCut in DLC satin. HRC is 62 to 64, which is great. I think that's going to make everybody happy. We have lots of titanium. We have, in this case, a titanium backspacer and a marble carbon fiber inlay on both sides, quite a bit of it. Pretty technical build, pretty complicated build. A lot of milling involved and a lot of like lines that could look bad, but are made perfect because of Riot manufacturing. So weight, 4 ounces, actually lighter than I would have guessed. A lot of blade, and it widens out at the tip, so you end up with pretty darn good balance right behind the pivot. So the whole thing feels pretty good. It doesn't feel heavy. you're going to be very aware that there's like stuff sticking out because of the flipper tabs on both sides, even though one side is not a flipper tab, right? It's also a good way to tell. A lot of people would say, how do you know which side to flip? Mentally, if you can feel, like if you're getting your knife out of your pocket and you somehow flip it over, if you're on the side with the swedge, it's the wrong side. Also, you'll know if you're on the side with the elongated flipper tab, which can be an issue. If everything's perfectly symmetrical, like with the Arch Nemesis, that can be a little bit of an issue. And you guys have seen me actually on live streams pick that thing up and attempt to flip it on the wrong side because I'm not looking at the knife because it feels exactly the same. So that is a downside to having everything perfectly symmetrical, right? This is not perfectly symmetrical, so it's got a couple of little mental indicators, Let's see. Let's measure the blade stock thickness, and then we'll do a hardware check. There's one specific thing I want to mention about the hardware check here. It's not a bad thing, but when we get to it, I believe that this is probably the same as the spade, about like 150 thousandths or so. Yeah, it's probably about 155 thousandths, so about what I'd expect. Get out my tools for a hardware check. As per usual, my tools are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them right down in the section of my description that talks about the tools I use in this channel or the pinned comment. Everything is T8 on this knife. Everything except possibly one thing, which I'm not going to get into because I don't think it's that important. On the spade, I assumed, and I think I edited it. If I didn't, I'm sorry. I assumed that this T8 screw also went all the way through and attached the pocket clip, which they probably should have done, but they didn't. It doesn't. It's a short screw that just holds in the inlay. There's a hidden screw underneath here holding in the pocket clip. That one could be T6. Outside of that, this is an insanely simple knife to disassemble. It's just a frame lock. Everything's T8. But yeah, don't expect loosening that screw to also loosen the pocket clip. It's only got 3 or 4 threads. It's just holding this in. So as long as you have the right tools for the job, you should be good to go. Did we do everything? I think we did. Okay, meat and potatoes time. It's actually much like the spade. This simple pocket clip works for this design. It's not much of an issue in hand. I'd say more so I'm feeling the ledges here. These ledges, and there's an attempt here, but at the same time, I feel like the fact that this dropped and then went flat actually makes this a little, it's not sharp, it's just, I notice it. Way more than the pocket clip, So, I feel like the number of people who are going to buy this and take it out and like try to use it as a dedicated EDC, it's pretty low. I think there are people who will take it out and use it, A lot of people are going to buy it to collect, but we're still within that user collector enthusiast territory where there's like a little bit of everybody. I'm definitely a hybrid, but I also use knives very, very casually. So it doesn't bother me to use a knife like this, even when we have blade geometry that's not ideal for slicing. And we also have an edge that would be a nightmare to it's plenty possible to read. This is going to be a lot easier to maintain than the spade. Still going to be a little bit annoying, even for people who are well practiced at sharpening. You have a thick recurve and then a totally separate edge right here, right? Subtle belly there too. And then you also have a plunge grind where, if this is going to be your dedicated EDC, you're going to be using it enough to have to sharpen it enough, then the plunge grind is probably going to bother you. But again, if you're like me, when you got lots of knives and you just strop them back to life and then, or rotate, with 5, 10, 15 other knives, and probably not, just depends on how much you're going to use it. But yeah, holding this knife and using it and cutting with it was fun for me because of how this looked. It had this cool, like I said earlier, a World of Warcraft aesthetic, especially in here. That's what it makes me think of. The very thick, the bevel that leads down to a thick edge, comes up to a flat that highlights this area in here. And then the area is cut kind of like this, so that it's all the three-dimensional aesthetic of this is like really highlighted in here. They could have just cut a hole in this and left it, but it's intentionally like sloped so that you can see it in there. So cool. It's so cool. This little things like that are the reason that people are going to pick this up. Not because they're under some delusion that this is like, somehow ideal for some task. No. The people that this is, meant to attract and the people who are going to be picking this up are going to be buying it because at base, it is a functional cutting tool. But to them, it's more of just the wow factor, the cool factor. We don't get to see stuff like this. Even the folding, symmetrical, dagger-looking designs out there are nowhere near as pronounced, as loud. This is such an awesome design, and it looks so cool. I love it. I mean, it honestly looks like a sword. It looks like something from World of Warcraft. I've always loved that just outrageous, chunky aesthetic, the impossible geometry of the computer-generated weapons in that game. It's ridiculous. If they were real life, they'd be way too heavy to wield, and they certainly wouldn't have an edge. It would just be like a blunt weapon. But it didn't matter. The whole game was ridiculous, and it just made it fun. This is kind of like in between. It's completely and totally, completely and totally functional. Very thick behind the edge here and here, right? It'll still cut and slice, but it's not going to be, like, yeah, it'll absolutely, and even on the edge up here, you can get it. But I can tell, factory thick edge, it's a little more draggy than like something that's meant to have optimal cutting geometry, right? So, but this is the type of knife that you carry to wow yourself and anybody else, any of your knife buddies, or just people you like to talk knives with. Like, this is the type of knife that people go, wow, that's crazy, right? Yeah, you are going to feel the edges squeezing it here. You feel the pocket clip a little bit, but it's pretty nicely knocked down, and it has that nice, it goes right up the middle, so it looks good with the inlays. Unfortunately, it can't be mounted on the other side, which I feel like is a bit of a miss. There should have been a way to do that, whether you do the wraparound in the slot, I mean, you've got the screw holes for it, so you could easily do that. There's plenty of material in here, right? This inlay, I guess, it could be stepped up so that you could leave a little bit of titanium here and leave some room to nest that in the titanium. There's a few ways to do it, but I don't want to come down too hard. I just think there's the vision for this project was so nearly perfectly thought through to get this aesthetic. It's amazing that there were accommodations at all for little tiny things like access to the lock bar and appropriate detent and appropriate flipper tab jimping and comfort and all of that. This was built by a knife person, not just somebody who wanted to bring a really cool fantasy aesthetic to a pocket knife. I mean, we've got plenty of junk. We got plenty of junk tier. A lot of people have already said that looks like a gas station knife. Yeah, we got plenty of junk knives where the designers are like, it doesn't have to be functionally perfect. Who cares? Put a dragon on it and make it look like fantasy stuff. Who cares? People will buy it. Make it cheap. Make it out of cheap materials and put a low price tag on it. People will buy it. No, this is made premium. Premium materials. Premium fit and finish. Incredible tolerances. And also built in a way that is very accommodating to somebody who really wants to carry and use it, or at the very least sit and flip it over and over again, which is cool. I appreciate that. It's neat. I don't know that there's a lot more to say about the blade here. I think it would be cool in the future if he really made a double-edged version of this. But if you think about what's involved there, it would require altering unless he found a way to center the pivot and bring the entire thing over, you would still have to kind of overhaul the shape of the handle so that you get both edges securely inside of the frame, and so that you don't touch it. Even on the Arch Nemesis, the very top of the edge is almost exposed, and you can definitely touch it. And I think that was just like, well, we had to make some sacrifices, So that's really tricky to do. I've found and heard from people who have tried to design knives like this is that it is extremely difficult not only to make a symmetrical design, but to make it all fit together and function properly and keep no part of the sharpened edge exposed. So I feel like just not sharpening that one edge allowed him so much more room to make it aesthetically what he wanted to make it. And Crescent Edges, sorry, I bumped the camera. If you want to chime in and add to that, because I'm sure that I'm barely covering the tip of the iceberg. If you want to chime in and go into detail about, ups and downs in the design, I think that'd be great just for people to, I'll pin it if you want to. But I think that would be really cool. But anyways, we have the backspacer here. And then we have the stop pin. There's no lanyard hole, which, whatever. You could put one in the pocket clip, I guess, if you really wanted to. The stop pin is internal. You can see it right here. In the open or the locked out position, no blade play up, down, left, or right. There is a steel lock bar insert that doubles as the over travel stop. Lockup geometry, really, really good. Looks to be maybe 30%, probably a little bit more. We can see, yeah, it's actually about 40% lock bar engagement, maybe almost 50%, which is great. Nice and solid, no movement, no lock stick, no pivot lash, smooth and consistent in here. Nice detent. Looks to be perfectly centered. Man, I love this. Crescent edges, I'm paying attention. I think for this being your first release, this is so cool. If you plan on, this knife being a dedicated user, you're in for a cumbersome ride in terms of like the blade geometry. And, yeah, it's totally usable. Could you, buy this and have it as like your dedicated cutting tool? Yeah, sure, you could. You're just, you're going to be in for some frustrations in terms of sharpening. It's never going to slice like something that is built for slicing geometry. So if you're going to cut into, thick materials for long, especially when you're doing long cutting jobs, breaking down cardboard boxes, cutting into styrofoam, especially things like rubber, yeah, it's going to hold you up. But a casual user experience, or just somebody who just likes to have something cool in their pocket, which at this price point and like where we are in like the market, like with this designer obviously designing something that's designy, functional, but more so designy, right? Most people are going to know that, right? So I don't recommend this to people looking for a super utilitarian, straightforward cutting tool. No, you have a million options that are generally less expensive, right? Even somebody looking for a premium utilitarian folding knife, no, you've got a bunch of other options out there that are just going to be, far more practical. But for those of you who are like me and you're just sick to death of all of the incredibly generic stuff that's the thing that goes along with the super utilitarian stuff. Yeah, it's incredibly functional and that's great. And for the most part, that's what a lot of knife people are looking for. But if you're a collector, that stuff usually just lands in the same blah territory. It all just kind of looks the same because the utility-oriented aesthetic all tends to fit within a certain box for good reason, right? There's just certain blade geometries and shapes and handle shapes that's just been proven to work over time. But it all just sort of ends up landing in the same boat. If you're like me, you're a collector or an enthusiast or a little bit of both, but you still want your knives that are in that territory to be usable if you want to, casually, and you want the premium stuff, you're like, I know it's not optimized, but I still want it to be premium. Boy, yeah, this is super cool. I feel like the collectors are going to go nuts for this. It's awesome. So cool. I expect big things from Crescent edges, but I can promise you guys, everything they release, if they're willing to send me samples, I will cover it on this channel. I am so pleased with this. I'm so tickled. This knife really tickles my fancies. Sorry. But I'm sorry for coughing and for saying gross things. But yeah, this is a knife that I'm not going to recommend to the average person, but I am going to put it in my favorite knives of all time playlist just because it's super unique and super cool. But at $365, which I hadn't said the price yet, it's a Riot build, and it's a complicated and very unique Riot build. The blade itself is very different from a simple, like a straightforward drop point blade with a flat grind or a hollow grind on it. It's DLC, it's Magna Cut. There's a lot of titanium, and it's also contoured, or at least cut with those machines. And then you have a complicated custom pivot, and you have inlays, carbon fiber on both sides. I mean, it's far from a typical build. You can get double-sided titanium and S90V knives from Artisan Cutlery for $200. Sure. Are they doing the same thing as this knife? No, they're not. Furthermore, I know that Riot and many companies who offer OEM services, in the early days, they didn't charge so much. But they've figured out to guarantee that they win on every single project, no matter what, they figured out they need to charge a lot. And so it doesn't leave a lot of room. It kind of, leaves it on, whoever's ahead of in charge of the project, in this case, Crescent Edges. They end up having to mark it up a little higher than, standard competition in order to make any money off of it. So I don't so much point the finger at Crescent Edges as I do Riot. And that's, they're a business. So it just kind of, it's like, it sucks, but it's like, okay. They're not the only company who does it. We does it, Best Tech does, anybody who offers OEM services. It's well known by now that they charge a lot more than they used to for these types of projects. It's expensive. When you look at Riot's other knives, even their in-house stuff, $365 is on the lower end. Riot tends to be over $400. So I'm not really upset with the price tag, and clearly the people who ordered these weren't either, because to my knowledge, these all sold out. So it could be a little bit less expensive, sure. But I think I understand why it's priced the way that it is. So I don't know. I think, if I'm being honest, we're approaching Chinese premium integral territory. But just, to be fair, I gotta give points towards the complexity of the design. But I think like maybe 325 to 350 probably would have felt a lot more, accurate. So I'm not, it's not crazy overpriced, but it's maybe a little high. But then again, they sold. So anyways, that's going to be it today, guys. I'm just gushing at this point. Please make sure to follow me on Instagram at metal_complex. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on that Metal Complex logo right there and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.